For decades, America has tried to combat the harms of drug use primarily through banning drugs and incarcerating people who use them. But this has caused a violent underground market for drugs, increasing crime in our communities. It's caused contaminated substances, increasing overdose deaths, and it's caused incarceration to skyrocket, destabilizing families. What we're doing isn't working. Crime, death, and broken families are the collateral damage of using the criminal justice system to address the public health issue of drugs. If you're looking for a better path forward, you're in the right place. What if we changed our drug policies to prioritize life, health, harm reduction, and thriving? And what if it benefited all of us? Our criminal justice approach to drugs had a beginning, and it can have an end. Join us on the journey to end it for good. I'm Christina Dent, your host, and if you're new here, End It For Good is a nonprofit started in 2019, based in Mississippi, that invites people to support approaches to drugs that prioritize life and the opportunity to thrive. This podcast is one of the ways we do that. You can head over to episode 34 to hear my story as a conservative Christian foster mom, changing my own mind on the best path forward with drugs, and then come on back and dive in deeper. I didn't change my mind overnight, and most other people don't either. We all need time to learn, think, ask questions, and explore. Whatever your perspective is, I'm glad you're here. Let's journey together. Welcome back to the End It For Good podcast. I'm Christina Dent, your host. Really excited to be here today with my friend, Kathy McKinney. She is the proud parent of two amazing and beautiful young adults who struggle with addiction and mental health. And she spent 20 years in the school system. Then she took her current role as an adult services librarian for the Plaza Midwood Library in Charlotte, North Carolina. And there she also leads a smart family and friends group, which we're going to get into. We're going to be talking a lot today about family support for people who love someone who's struggling with a substance use disorder. So Kathy, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
So let's get into how you got involved in this realm of substance use, addiction, and family support.
Yeah, so I have two children. They're adopted. They are both of their birth parents struggle with substance use, and so we've adopted them at a very young age. And so it's kind of always been on my radar. And then as they became adolescents, they started to struggle with addiction, and that sort of set me on a learning journey where I was trying to figure out kind of what can I do to help them. And as I learned things, I realized that these are things that I really wanted to share with other families. And that kind of coincided with my work at the library, where I was able to start a group with parents. And then eventually that led me to leading a smart family and friends. A lot of what I learned as we were going through all this, it was really hard, but also was just that I really benefited from being around other families who were going through the same thing. And it just really helps to sometimes be able to test something out with somebody, practice it. And also it's just to share with other families, like some of the struggles.
Yeah. Talk about what a smart family and friends group is for people that aren't familiar with that.
So the smart family and friends, so it's Smart Recovery has a 4-point program, which is for people who are in recovery themselves. It can be from any sort of addiction, but it's a skills-based, evidence-based practice where you learn tools and skills to help you cope and make choices. It doesn't require you to be, abstinent or sober, but it's just kind of like you want to improve your life. So that the 4-point program is for the people in recovery, and then I guess out of that, they created a family and friends group, which is for people who love someone who struggles with addiction. And so they use a lot of the same skills. We also, it's a little bit of support, but then it also ends up being just learning like tools, things that you can do to help yourself cope, and then just communication skills to use with your loved one that can make things better and kind of de-escalate and just improve that relationship.
Yeah. And if people are listeners of the podcast, they know we're big fans of that kind of approach, giving loved ones tools rather than just saying, you've got to step back, you've got to cut them off, you've got to let them hit rock bottom. But helping families have the tools so that they feel like they can engage, they can have the healthiest relationship possible, even in the midst of addiction. And they feel like they can do something to improve the possibility that their loved one will make positive changes in their life. So how did you come across this path? Because it in my experience, every parent I've talked to has had some sort of learning journey where they figured out the way that we were raised to think about addiction is not helpful in terms of how we respond to it. We were kind of in the, well, it's either their moral compass is broken or they just need some punishment. And so a little shame goes a long way to help them realize that they're not acting right and to get their behavior changed. So what was your path of kind of learning there are other options out there and going down that path of learning about those and implementing those?
So I was born in the 80s, so I definitely was like the Friday on the sidewalk, like the just say no era, and familiar with kind of like the intervention strategy. So I do think I had a lot of the some of it is sort of 12-step based, but a lot of these ideas are like, you can't make somebody change until they're really ready and all these things. And when my kids started struggling, I was like, this isn't acceptable. Like, I'm not willing to not do anything. And I feel like you're sort of stuck in this tunnel of like, well, you're really not it's wrong if you're wanting to try to, like, if you're doing things to try to help them or try to get them to change, like that's out of your circle. You can't do that. And so one of the first treatment centers we took my son to, and this is after I tried shaming and blaming and grounding and kind of all the traditional, we tried therapy too, but a lot of yelling, a lot of like taking away the phone and realizing that just sent things underground. So after trying a lot of that, while my son was in his first rehabilitation center, they gave us a reading list, and one of the books on the reading list was Beyond Addiction. And I started listening to it, and sorry, at the time, I thought like, well, I don't really need to listen to this book. Like, my son's in treatment. It's going to be great. We're going to be fine. But I listened to it anyway, and so glad now that I did, because it kind of started me down the road of learning that, like, kind of why people, sorry, give me a second, kind of why people use drugs. It really helped me figure out, some of it seems so obvious, like, if shaming and blaming worked, we really wouldn't have an addiction problem, because everybody's tried that. And I also, like, Beyond Addiction helped me think about, like, if somebody comes at me guns blazing, like, you need to quit drinking so much caffeine and you need to keep your car clean. Like, I don't want to change. So it also really, like, made me rethink how I was approaching my kids, and I realized how much judgment I had towards them. And definitely had just, like, even, like, recognizing that, like, I had one feeling about alcohol, but, like, a different feeling about pot. Like, that was so, and just sort of, like, all these kind of underlying things about, like, what people who did them and what that meant about them, and just like kind of unpacking a lot of that. So I think it was like reading that book, and then from there it was just sort of like all these little turning points of maybe finding a podcast or the Partnership to End Addiction. One of the parents who was in like my son's second group, she sent me Coming Up for Air and the Allies in Recovery stuff, and so all of those little things started to teach me a little bit more about this approach. And I just started to realize, like, obviously what I was doing before was not working, because we tried that for a couple of years and things were awful in our house. It was a lot of chaos, a lot of yelling, feeling very distant. And so I feel like it was just sort of like that. That was kind of the beginning.
What are some of the insights that you took away, some of the ideas that have resonated with you and you found to be helpful?
One of the biggest ones that I feel like is maybe even harder for parents, but probably also hard for spouses. I have some spouses in my group. Is this idea that you can still have a connection and have a relationship with this person that is not about, have conversations with them that are not about their substance use. And, looking back, like when I would think about sitting down to dinner with my family, like, I didn't want to talk to my kids about anything but you've got to stop using drugs, because that's all that you can think about. And so when you kind of realize, like, oh, I need to connect to them on some other level, first of all, so they even want to be around me so I can have some influence. But just how important that connection is. Um, there's a great interview with Emily Klein about motivational interviewing that was on the Hope Stream podcast. And she just kind of talks about, how instead of feeling like I'm not doing anything about the drug use, you're like, I'm working on the relationship and how important that is. So I'd say that was a big one. Also, just to me, it's pretty amazing how much it matters how you talk to somebody. And I get it. You can definitely tell, like when I read your newsletter yesterday, even just talking about like how you approach somebody has a huge impact on whether or not they respond positively or negatively. I also love Put the Shovel Down. She talks about how people's defenses go up when you're judging them, criticizing them. So just learning like to recognize like, okay, am I feeling angry and judgmental, and is what I'm saying gonna, and slowing down. Like I have learned to be so much more patient. Um, when you're worried about your kids, you do tend to be like, we've got to do something about this now. And so it's like every single event was a crisis. And so just learning also, so much of it is like getting yourself regulated, refocusing on your own life. But a lot of that, and a lot of just, I think also just thinking about why my kids were using, like it was helping them, like it was solving some of their problems of like anxiety and not really feeling connected to other people. And that made me a lot more sympathetic and empathetic and not feel so personal, like they're doing this to me and to our family, and that kind of thing. So a whole lot of that was a lot of changes. Like I feel like I'm a totally different person.
Mm-hmm. You've talked about that you feel like families need many of the same things that their loved ones need who are struggling with substance use disorder. What do you mean by that?
um, One of the, I would say like, so many of like the tools, like the pausing, one of the tools in Smart Family is like the pause and reflect. But I feel like that's across the board for groups that use kind of a craft-based approach. Is first of all like learning to stop and just kind of recognize like how am I feeling right now, being really in touch with like your body, mindfulness. So that's really important, I think, for people who are using substances to cope, but also really helpful for families who are kind of stuck in this reacting phase all the time, the sort of chronic crisis mindset. So that slowing down tool is really, really valuable. Because I feel like when you can slow down, you actually can kind of figure out what do I want to do, since there's not like an exact right answer to so many things that come up. Like, do I let them drive the car today, or do I, like even the practical things, like when you slow down and can think about it, like here's how I'm feeling inside, like my chest is tight or I'm angry. So recognizing like how you feel, and then you can make a decision that's not like a, knee-jerk reaction. Um, a lot of it is like recognizing thinking patterns, which I think helps everybody. And I remember when my son was in one of his groups, when we were doing like, he was doing the 12 steps, and I was listening to the questions, and I was like, really, everybody should do like a moral inventory, and it wouldn't hurt everybody to look back at like, what are my resentments? So just kind of like questions. And so a lot of the smart tools, I just feel like they really force you to reflect on yourself and kind of recognize what is my part in this, or what is my, what do I control? And, so many of those things I think really help if people are also struggling with addictive behaviors.
Yeah, I just ran across a page. I don't know where I got it from. A couple of days ago when I was cleaning out some files of, it's like there's a small circle in the middle that says things that I can control. And then there's like a whole bunch of things outside of it that are things I cannot control. And that I think is we all want to live in a little bit of a delusion that we control more than we do. And it's really difficult, I would imagine, especially when it's your child, to kind of recognize where that line is and put in the internal work to say, I can't control them. I cannot change them as much as I would give everything to do that, or change their coping mechanisms. But I can do I do still have things I can control about how I respond and how I think about this. And what are some of those kind of common communication patterns that are just well intended, but not helpful?
Um, I think, well, obviously, some of the ones that come from love that are, and also to me, like, part of it is probably personality, but came natural are like, of course, it makes sense to scream and yell at your kid when you think they're doing something that's going to hurt them, like yelling at them, trying to make them feel guilty. And it's even the shaming. It's not that you're doing it because you're evil and you want to hurt your kid. It's because you're like, maybe this will make them change. Like, maybe if I say this just the right way, or if I scare them enough. Um, and so those are like sort of those tend to be the unhelpful things that just they feel kind of natural and react, in the moment. I think also sometimes kind of like over helping somebody and thinking like, oh, well, if I just tell them like, here's a job you can apply for, and what about trying this, and like kind of stepping in to solve their problems is a really natural thing to do, I think, with kids. And even with spouses, and I come from a teaching background, so it's with everybody. Like I just know what's best for you. So I think recognizing that just listening to people instead of like trying to fix them, solve their problems, and just kind of waiting for them sometimes to figure it out themselves. Like the reflective listening is really helpful. So instead of, when somebody says like, oh, like my friend's not talking to me and he blocked me on his phone, I can't believe it, instead of trying to be, well, maybe it's because of this, or could you try that? Instead of that, just being like, oh, wow, that sounds hard. And then just waiting and listening. And I feel like when I'm able to do that, instead of like trying to help or fix all the time, it helps my kids feel more confident and figure out kind of what they want to do. And it just feels more respectful of, their autonomy and that kind of thing. So I think that sort of fixing can be problematic.
What are some of the changes that you feel like in a family and in you personally, even, and people that you've seen, that when they start practicing a different approach? You mentioned craft, which is community reinforcement and family training. When they use some of those principles that are part of programs like that, motivational interviewing skills are part of that. People can Google all of these things and get kind of quick hits on what these are and how to use them. What are the benefits? Because I could imagine a parent or a loved one listening going, that sounds so useless and really hard,
Yeah.
that sounds really hard to just be like, I'm sorry, that stinks that your friend won't talk to you or whatever, instead of like, well, don't you see that you're treating them this way and that way and the other way, and I wouldn't talk to you either if I was in their situation. That it feels like our emotional side goes, well, at least I'm being honest with them, So what are the benefits? Because I would imagine the only reason people are going to put in the effort and time to learn and practice things that are challenging to do is because there's something pretty great on the other side. They can, they know, whether through research or because they're seeing other families living it. So what is it that is gained from this that isn't gained from the shaming and blaming and yelling and that kind of approach?
I want to acknowledge it is super hard, especially because a lot of times when your family members are struggling, they can be just really mean, and it can be so hard to like be calm and be kind. And like, if they lose their fifth job, it's really hard not to be like, well, of course you got fired, you've been late, and feeling like that's going to teach them. I will say in my own life, the reverse I feel like my kids have actually recognized their own mistakes 50,000 times more when I have not tried to explain or teach them a lesson or given them the error of the ways. I feel like they actually are way more likely to be like, kind of talk themselves through, like, maybe this is why I did that. And I feel like the learning is better. But as far as like improving just even your own life, like I feel like I am just like a calmer, happier person, and I still have two kids struggling. And I think a few years ago I would have said, oh, it's impossible. Like if my kids are still struggling, I'm going to be miserable. And so, well, I'm still obviously sad a lot of the time. I also really find a lot more pockets of joy And I also have part of, the community reinforcement is that you begin to build a life separate from your, or not separate from your loved one, but like that exists whether or not your loved one is using substances. And so just really, like I would say, I found more joy. I also communicate with other people so much better. I work in a library and we deal with a lot of people in crisis. And so, like, motivational interviewing, so valuable. I just feel like I can talk more to people. A big benefit I see too with loved ones, and I feel like this is across the board in my family group too, is that when you stop with the yelling and the blaming, or okay, we'll say cut back, because really,
we're human.
Yes. So when you cut back, I feel like is that my kids have been so much more honest with me. And like I have some siblings in the group. I feel like they've had the same experience. The spouses, they've had the same experience. That people are like, when you feel like a safe space, when they don't feel like they're going to get criticized or judged, then your kids start telling you stuff. And even if you don't always want to hear it, it's actually so valuable, because part of what you learn in craft is to learn to recognize what is their motivation to quit. What are their reasons? What are their patterns? Why do they use? And so I feel like my kids have actually shared with me, sometimes just like, sitting side by side playing Uno or doing something totally unrelated. But because I'm not yelling and criticizing as much, they explain to me like, well, when I use, this is how I feel, and this is, helps me. Or, they can say like, oh, this might have been partly my fault, because it feels safer. And that is so rewarding. I think it helps your kids get on a better path. I feel like if I had really been like, kick them out of the house, tough love, that I feel like, I don't know I feel like my kids would be in a much worse situation right now, and that I would be wrecked. So I feel like it preserves the relationship, and it also keeps it open for when they are ready for help, which in our experience has been, it happens. And then you kind of, it's like an upward spiral, and then you have a change. And especially with young people, it's really hard to be like, yeah, I want to be sober for my whole life and go to meetings, because that's not what all the other 18 and 19-year-olds are doing, and can probably feel pretty lonely. So just like that openness and just myself being regulated, it's made it much easier for me to make decisions related to my kids or not related. Just that it just, for me, it really has made me feel so much more grounded, learning to use all these different ways and really look at myself. And it's made me less angry, which was not fun.
Yeah.
Like just a better life, I would say, overall.
Yeah. So what led you to start facilitating Smart Family and Friends groups? And I know I'll preface it by saying I know people find a lot of meaning in using something that's been painful in their lives to help other people. But you're being candid that this is still a challenge in your family, and there's a lot of energy. You have a career, and you have the path that you're walking in your own family. Why do this at this point, where it's sort of another outlay of emotional investment in other families? Why did you decide to do that, and what is it that keeps you doing it?
I would say one of the things that made me decide is partly I felt like the things were so life-changing to me, and I would listen in some of like the partnership meetings and other ones, and you hear so many parents saying like their kids are now 30, 40, and so many people saying like, I wish I would have learned this earlier. I wish I would have known about like craft and invitation to change, or I wish I would have learned some of these skills. And so I felt like it had such a huge impact on me. I just was like, this is something I feel really compelled to share with other people. And so I'd started with the Beyond Addiction book study, because I was like, other people need to know about this book. And as I worked through that and kind of figured out some of the like things that did and didn't work with that, I started thinking like, I had been once to an in-person Smart Family and Friends, and maybe like one virtual. I was like, you know what? There was a lot of overlap with Beyond Addiction and a lot of the community reinforcement, all of that in there. And I just started thinking people needed a they needed like a space in our community. I felt like where they could come one Monday and then we wouldn't see them for 6 weeks and then they could come back. A lot of times, especially if you're kind of in the thick of it, it's really hard to take time. Um, so I felt like Smart was a really good option for that. And it's, um, it's just been really rewarding. Like when I leave the meetings, I feel better. Like I share my own experiences and I walk through the practices with people. And I feel like the more you do the practices, the more they become kind of second nature. And it helps so much to keep doing it with other people. It's also great because, you know, when my son was in his first center, we had like a family weekend and we sat in a room. This is probably the first time I really did a group with other families. And it's like you're kind of, everybody's sad, but you're also all laughing together about like, I'd shower with my purse, and like, how many holes do you have punched in your wall at home? And everybody's like, oh, yeah, 7. What about you? It just sort of like that kind of community around you feel like, oh, okay, this makes you feel not so isolated. And so I felt like that was really important. And I feel like there are good virtual options, but I really wanted there to be an in-person option in Charlotte where I live. And, we talk a lot about how it takes a while to build a group. And, I've probably had over the course, I've probably seen, 10 to 12 different people, but not consistently. Some of them come every week or pretty faithfully. But I just felt like it's just really helpful. And it's a way to spread something that I think saves lives. Really.
Yeah, that's really awesome. I love that. And I love that it is a combination of support and practical skills. I think that's, as someone who has been in various groups for various reasons, it can feel, if it's just kind of a dumping session, sometimes that can feel pretty heavy if it doesn't feel like you're kind of taking some tools away or some encouragement away. And that's one of the things I feel like is so helpful, is to kind of combine those things, give people a place to say, this is what's going on and it's really hard. And also, okay, let's workshop some, even practicing kind of role playing, which is, it makes sense that would be such a helpful skill, because in our own learning about, as we were fostering and parenting children and all of the things, of how helpful it is to role play appropriate responses with kids, even if they have responded in a way, and I'm talking about with younger kids, if they have responded in a way that is disrespectful or whatever it might be. That you say, oh, we're going to try that again. And this time, okay, I'm going to say the thing I said again, and then you're going to respond with the appropriate response this time. And we're just going to give you another go at that. And how helpful that is, because part of that it becomes this kind of muscle memory of communication. And you can't gain that without practicing it somehow. And it's really difficult for the first time to be when you're in the heat of a moment,
Yes.
And suddenly you're like, what was I supposed to say?
Look at that skill.
Yeah. What's the skill? But just to have a place where you can do a little bit of run through of practicing and even workshopping, hey, in this situation, like, what do I do? And I love the practical examples you're giving of like, do I let them drive the car today or not? I think those, like all of those small everyday choices that families are faced with, particularly if their loved one is in the home with them, of, what do I do? They said they were going to be home at 7. I've got dinner ready at 7. They're not here. What do we wait for them? Do we not wait for them? Do we leave the dinner out? Do we put it away? Do we say, sorry, no dinner for you? Do we there's just 1,000 small decisions that are part of trying to figure this out, and having a place where you can say, here's a situation we ran into this week. Has anyone else dealt with that? What did you find helpful? How could I approach that? And getting some feedback on what about this approach to that? And then, okay, so, all right, they walk in the door and I say, X, and you get a chance to kind of practice that. And for some people, that's going to sound like, I don't want to do that. That sounds crazy. But you've got to, it can either be begin learning some skills that most of us probably did not learn growing up in communication skills, or continuing the same patterns that haven't worked so far.
Yeah. If
So
yelling's working, hey, great.
let us know, because we haven't talked to anybody yet that has found that to be
please.
particularly effective. But maybe there is somebody out there for whom it has worked. But generally, our experience from talking with families is that it's not worked. It has been tried for a long time and found to be lacking. So
I did want to, something you said made me think, our last meeting, it was actually just me and one other person, and she kind of talked about decision fatigue. And she said, I just need somebody to tell me what to do. I was like, great, I love telling people what to do. So we just kind of workshopped like a couple of things. And one of the best things about like SMART and about like a lot of these approaches is they really ask you, like, this is why it's so important to get regulated, like to go from, I think they call it system 1 and system 2 thinking in SMART. And so like that system 2 is where you are deciding. And there's so much, there's so much outside noise. I feel like people will be so critical if you're letting your kids use drugs and still letting them sleep in your house, and you can't, and so you have to sometimes shut out that and be like, well, what do I feel okay with? Like, am I okay with my kid coming home and having a place to sleep, even if he's still not sober and not, and just like being able to decide like what works for me and what's okay with me, and that having that whole, I guess just you need to have like that menu, that spectrum of choices, and you're choosing it instead of, well, this is what like the counselor at that last place told me I had to do this. And, like when you can get out of that crisis mode and really use that system 2 thinking, because I think I said this before, it looks so different for every family. And I think, a lot of people feel like judged if they're trying to be nice to their kid who's using, or if they're letting their spouse stay in their house or sleep in their bed. And it's just really nice to have a group where people are like, hey, you know what, you have needs too. And sometimes you get to do what you need to do for yourself. I think that's just really helpful for families to know.
Yeah. Yeah. What have you found is the thinking about people who are not actively walking with a loved one themselves, but they have friends who are, which is, I mean, almost everyone's walking with someone or connected to someone who's struggling with a substance use disorder, but everyone has friends who are. And that's a really difficult position to kind of know how to support. Does my friend want to be asked how their child is doing, or do they not? Do I just avoid kind of that conversation? Do I kind of pretend it's not there? What's helpful? Is it helpful to listen? Is it helpful to offer thoughts? Is it helpful to say, I listened to this podcast and you need to listen to this podcast too? What are your thoughts on how people who, they're Kathy's friend, and they want to know, how do I support Kathy as she's on this journey? What would you offer them?
I would say, and I'm so lucky because I have to say I have so many friends, some who are not, struggling with this at all, some who are, have similar situations, but who have just been there for me. I would say probably the biggest thing yet is to listen, and maybe to check in with that person and just be like, hey, I know you guys are going through a rough time. If you want me to ask about so-and-so, I'm happy to. But if you also want me to just be like, I don't want to talk about it, that's cool too. And kind of just, making like it's really important just to recognize that it's there and not make them feel like they can't talk about it. Because I have met families who, aside from the groups, have shared it with no one. And to me, that just seems super heavy and painful to carry. So I would say if you think somebody is going through that, it's really nice just to hear somebody say like, hey, I know this is tough. I would say don't give advice. Maybe even if you did like see a podcast that you thought was helpful, maybe say, use some of the motivational interviewing skills, like asking permission first and saying like, hey, I know this might be really annoying, but I did hear this podcast that you might find interesting. Do you care if I send it to you? Or is that going to be like just one more thing? Like just kind of recognizing that they're probably already getting a lot of advice, or maybe really struggling, but they might be like, yeah, no, I'd love to hear that. My friends have just been really good about just letting me call and being like, hey, I need therapy session, can I call, and just letting me cry and vent, and like they've actually learned what craft is, which is beautiful. Like,
Mm.
I just loved it when one of my friends was like, "Oh no, she's using craft." I was like, "Oh my gosh!" um,
Yeah.
so just like a lot of listening and um, checking in and like practical things sometimes. Like I think just like a food gift card if they're like right in the middle of getting somebody to treatment or something. I think just kind of the same sort of things for anyone in a kind of crisis, but recognizing that, if you think of it, like if your kid was in the hospital, how would people respond?
Mm.
They would talk about it and they would not be embarrassed to bring it up. And so
Hmm.
kind of trying to get comfortable with, like, hey, I know they're really struggling. How's it going? Or
Yeah.
that sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And it seems like too for friends who, um, to try to educate themselves about, what is it that their friend is learning about? What are
Yeah.
they trying to, what's the approach they're trying to take so they can kind of, um, not just kind of sit off in maybe judgment, or maybe there's just an uncertainty of judgment. I think, so many of the people who, when I started talking about kind of just drugs and addiction policy and approaches on social media, would come up to me separately, like in person, because at first it was just people in my area, and say, actually my mom struggled all growing up, or my, whatever, like would kind of share that. And it was really interesting to me how many people I knew and didn't
Mm-hmm.
know this part of their story, or them walking with a loved one. And it just continued to impress upon me how many people are quietly waiting to see. They don't want to offer this painful, so personal part of their life to someone, even if they're a friend, without being pretty certain about how they're going to respond to it. They don't want to say, "I just checked my son into treatment," and potentially get a facial expression back that's like, "Oh my,
Yeah.
I thought he was a good kid.
Yeah.
Now, like, what kind of, I mean, it's already, the situation is so painful. The risk of offering that information to someone that you're unsure of how they will respond to it is just too great." So my encouragement for people is always, don't say, "Well, I'm pretty sure I would be really supportive." Well, do your friends, do the people in your circles know that you would be? How are you communicating that kind of proactively, of like, we do it in 1,000 ways. We do it in small comments that we
Yeah.
make about all kinds of things, about news stories we see about, and what is that communicating to the people around you? Is it communicating compassion and understanding and sadness over, rather than judgment over, like, wow, they must really be hurting. There must be a lot going on there, that they would be kind of engaging in that behavior. That's just, that's really tough. And I just think I know it sounds difficult for people to do, because they think, well, this just doesn't come up. It actually does come up a lot,
Yeah.
and you don't even realize that you're making these kind of small comments that people are picking up on, and
Yeah.
they are, that is informing to them whether or not you are someone that they can confide in,
Yeah.
about
Somebody
this.
used the word junkie in a conversation. And I mean, like, just take that one out of your vocabulary. Like that, just, because, yeah, you do have that moment of like, wow, do you know, like, what that means? What you just said is cast judgment over a whole group of people. And,
Yeah.
um, just like, I mean, you want to blame somebody for spending a lot of money or helping someone with cancer, so if a family, is, but I do think that, yeah, there's a lot of opportunity for conversation and making it feel more like one of the things, when I shared with like the adult services librarians about, possibly doing more smart recoveries, just saying like, the more you can have the conversation of like talking about recovery, just like this sort of normal thing, just like, people are much more comfortable talking about mental health now. But, the same way if you were having a program on, like, people with disabilities, or, a program on some sort of health aspect of, diabetes, like you wouldn't feel as like nervous or, afraid to bring it up. And so just sort of making it like part of a conversation that's much more recognizing like these are just people struggling. They also have a lot of gifts, but they need help, just like I would if I had, illness or something.
Yeah. Yep. As we wrap up, favorite resources. You can just list them off.
Yeah.
What are the things that have been helpful? Whether it's a book, it's a podcast, it's a program. I know you have done, because we've talked about this, you've just done a lot of learning yourself and going through trainings and just trying to give yourself as many tools as possible. What are the ones that have been most helpful to you?
I'll definitely say like read the book Beyond Addiction, do the workbook that they have, also Invitation to Change. Those are all very similar, but the repeating really helps kind of cement it. And then I would also say some of the podcasts that I have loved are Living While Loving Your Child with Heather Ross. And that's, I think even if it's not your child, she just offers a lot of wisdom. Put the Shovel Down, which is another podcast. They're great. Allies in Recovery, because they have their whole YouTube videos are folks can learn craft from the Allies in Recovery YouTube channel. Hope Stream, and I also
which is a podcast.
Yes, podcast. And then I also would recommend there's several like really good recovery storybooks. Gosh, I'm going to have a hard time thinking of the titles, but one is Corrections in Ink. I really loved that kind of describes her own recovery journey, but also a lot about prisons. And then The Many Lives of Mama Love is also a great recovery story. And I Am Not Broken, really hard to read, but powerful. But just those are some of the favorites. I just also encourage journaling, even like as you're working through these books and these resources, the journaling, for me at least, has been really, really helpful, like processing and, kind of decide. Like, I will write out, like, here's how I'm going to say this. And that helps me kind of get ready for a hard conversation.
Yeah.
And Emily Klein has a website, too, that has a whole little training on motivational interviewing, especially focused with young adults. And that is great. I think even if you have little kids, I wish I would have watched it when I was parenting young adult or younger kids, because it's so good. It's if you just look up Dr. Emily Klein, I think you'll find her.
Awesome. Yeah, I think the motivational interviewing skills are universally applicable to all of life and communication.
All people, yes.
Yeah, and for long-time listeners of the podcast, some of our very first episodes were a multi-part series with Timothy King, and his explanation of his journey into recovery, and really that pathway, which started for him with a doctor who said, I think you have become dependent on these opioids and it's not your fault. And I'm here with you. This was before the changes where doctors had to cut people off cold turkey. And so his doctor was able to work with him. And a lot of what the doctor was using was motivational interviewing to help Tim see what was happening and begin making those changes to be able to move away from that dependence and ultimately away from opioids. But
Probably totally changed the outcome of his story too.
Yes. Yes. Yep. Absolutely.
And partnership to end addiction. One more.
Wonderful. This is so great.
They have free online parent support meetings, like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Saturday. So Partnership to End Addiction is also really, really helpful. And you can just like linger in the background if you don't. And then Smart Recovery also has virtual meetings. So, okay. That's it.
Love it. Love it. I can hear all the pens scratching on the notepads as we get through all of the resources here at the end. But thank you so much, Kathy. Thank you for sharing something so close to your heart, and for giving all of these tools that have been helpful. And I think so often we see on our kind of listens to the podcast, it is the episodes with family members who are walking with a loved one that are the ones that are consistently the highest downloads. And I think that's because people are sharing them with other people and saying, hey, this might be a helpful thing, or sharing them with a group that maybe is a support group to them and gives them some more tools. So thank you so much for being here, for sharing what you've learned, and for the work that you're continuing to do in Charlotte and beyond. And as I told Kathy she needed to write a book, and she said, I actually am already writing a book. So stay tuned. We'll let you know. We'll let you know when that comes out. But thanks so much for being with us, Kathy, and sharing.
Well, thank you. And also, I love the work you do and appreciate all that.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks so much for being with us on the End It for Good podcast. You can go hit subscribe if you haven't already. We're also on YouTube now. We've got TikTok. There's lots of ways that you can connect with End It for Good. And if you're not on our newsletter already, encourage you to go to enditforgood.com and sign up for that. And there's a lot more content where this comes from with the rest of our work. And we'll see you next time. So how do we shift our drug policies from a criminal justice approach to a public health approach? By inviting one person at a time to change their mind. Changed minds are the catalyst to changed laws. But many people are only willing to have this conversation when they're invited to by someone that they trust. That's you. Invite your friends, coworkers, other people in your circle of influence to consider a better way. At End It for Good, our hope is that people who hear will become people who tell. Start a conversation and join the movement to end it for good.